Minecraft building has a massive fatal flaw. It's not the lack of blocks, the fact that the game is made of 1-meter cubes, or any other issue that is some creative solution and a few thousand YouTube videos dedicated to it. Instead, it's a fundamental fact of how the game itself works that gives rise to this problem. But despite all that, there's one ridiculously easy way to negate the effects of this flaw, and it's the one Minecraft trick that no one uses. It's a trick common in art and architecture, and one of the most useful Minecraft skills to know, if you can do it right: forced perspective. Now, Minecraft has a problem. It's a voxel game. What this means is that the game is made of three-dimensional pixels called voxels that are roughly 1 meter cubed. These voxels make up the blocks Minecraft is famous for, and there are hundreds of different types of them in Minecraft, with more being constantly added. The problem is that this quickly adds up to a lot of blocks the game needs to render. Minecraft is a 3D game, which means that the size increases exponentially. For example, to create just one chunk, a 16 by 16 area, at roughly Minecraft sea level, the game has to render 32,256 blocks, which themselves could be any one of hundreds of blocks. This is the core of the problem. Rendering any large area requires massive amounts of computing power. Now, this presents a problem. A normal Minecraft render distance is 12 to 16 chunks, which end up being 192 to 256 meters. In real life, however, you can often see dozens of kilometers, or tens to hundreds of times further. If we assume that you could see a landmark or large building up to a relatively low 15 kilometers away in real life, this would translate to Minecraft needing to render a massive 44 billion blocks. In fact, the furthest you can possibly see in Minecraft with a top-of-the-line computer and combination of mods to increase your render distance is 96 chunks, or roughly 1.5 kilometers. Now, this is certainly better than a few hundred meters, but bear in mind that you can see hundreds of kilometers from a high elevation if you have relatively clear skies, which is common in the American West. There, visibility can exceed 150 kilometers, more than 100 times the furthest you can possibly see in Minecraft. And the simple fact remains, you'll be unlikely to see more than 1 kilometer without spending thousands or even tens of thousands of dollars on a high-end PC. However, this isn't even the worst part. Minecraft also has a build height of 320 blocks, which, combined with the lowest Y level being negative 64, means that you can get about 380 blocks of vertical height to build stuff with. Now, with that in mind, let's build a house. It doesn't need to be anything fancy, it just needs to get the job done. This house is roughly life-size. However, because it's so small, we can easily fit it in our render distance, even from a great distance away. Okay, so now that we've done that, let's build a town. We'll go with Aspen, Colorado, which is a population of roughly 7,000 people, making it a rather small town. Well, by normal standards at least, because it's 9 kilometers across, 6 times further than the maximum render distance in Minecraft. But it gets even worse. Visible from Aspen Airport is Capitol Peak, a 4,307 meter mountain about 20 kilometers away. That's almost 12 times the maximum elevation difference possible in Minecraft, and almost 14 times just the maximum build elevation. This presents a pretty obvious problem. If you want to make a landscape in Minecraft, you'll need to make it many times smaller than it would be in real life. The real problem here is with mountains. Now, in most cases, a mountain is generally thought of as being at least 300 meters above sea level, which in Minecraft would be at y equals 62. And yes, I know that there's no technical minimum height for a mountain, but early definitions and most geographers have historically put it at roughly 300 meters. That means that a mountain would have to reach y equals 362 to be, well, a mountain, which is 42 blocks above Minecraft's maximum build height. And while you can use mods to increase your build height, this does not address the core issue. Mountains are massive. Mount Everest, for example, is roughly 10 kilometers from one side to the other, more than 6 times the maximum render distance. And that's in addition to the fact that at 8,849 meters, it's nearly 28 times the maximum Minecraft build height. The unavoidable fact of the matter is that if you want to make a mountain, landscape, or even moderately tall skyscraper in Minecraft, you're going to have to decrease the scale. And this is in addition to the fact that Minecraft is played on a single screen in front of you, often making objects appear far smaller than they actually would be. The simple fact is, if you want to make anything in Minecraft look big, from a skyscraper to a mountain, you're going to need a few tricks. But luckily for us, these tricks have a name: forced perspective. Forced perspective uses the manipulation of depth perception to make things look larger or farther away than they appear. And while this may sound complicated, it in fact only requires a few simple techniques to implement. But first, let's talk about our eyes. They use a combination of monocular cues, which involve one eye, and binocular cues, which require both. We'll start with binocular cues. The way these work is simple. They involve triangulation between two eyes, and there are 2 ways your brain does this. The first is just the difference between what your eyes see, called retinal disparity. This allows our brain to triangulate out a 3-dimensional image of what we see, and is why things look oddly flat when you close one eye. The second is your eye's different angles. If you look at something directly in front of you, your eyes form the bottom angles of a triangle. Using this information, your brain can determine how far away something is. Now, both of these are almost impossible to manipulate because they depend almost purely on the distance something is from your eyes. However, there are 2 things that can mitigate this. The first is distance. Once an object is more than a few meters away, the difference between your field of vision and eye angles are virtually non-existent, which makes it much harder for your brain to determine depth with precision. The second is the fact that unless you are using VR, Minecraft is played on one screen. This means that your eyes can tell you how far the monitor is from your face, but it cannot determine the depth in the game itself, since it's just on a flat screen. What this means is that in Minecraft, your depth perception is only influenced by monocular cues. And at this point, I should probably explain monocular cues. There are a variety of them, and some contribute to your depth perception more than others. The first is relative size. Imagine a train moving away from you. As it moves further away, it will get smaller in your field of view. Since shrink rays have not yet been invented, your brain will generally interpret this as the object moving farther away from you. The second method of monocular depth perception is interposition. Imagine our train passes behind a building. When it does this, the train will be partially covered by this building. Thus, our brain will interpret the building as closer because the train is behind it. A variation of this is the idea that an object higher up on your horizon line is farther than an object lower than it, since taller objects tend to block smaller objects behind them. This is one that is rather hard to manipulate without using a ridiculous amount of planning and weird optical illusions. Next is linear perspective. Our world, especially in modern times, has a lot of straight lines. Buildings, streets, and electricity lines dominate our societies, and all are generally straight. Linear perspective involves the idea that straight lines will all converge at a single point on the horizon. This is also hard to manipulate, but does not contribute too much to depth perception. Fourth is aerial perspective. This, as its name suggests, involves the effect of the atmosphere on perspective. There are two main parts to aerial perspective. First is the idea that distant landmarks will appear lighter and bluer due to the color of the air, which is light blue. Second is the fact that distant objects will also be blurrier because the atmosphere scatters light coming from them. This ties into the next monocular cue, detail gradients. This is quite simple. The closer something is, the more detail we can make out. This is one that is easy to manipulate and can be done without too much work. The game does this automatically, but it can be done manually to increase the perception of depth. Next is the effect of light and shadows. In most situations, light comes from above. That way, most shadows will be on the bottom of a shape. While this is not too useful in forced perspective, it is still a useful thing to bear in mind, and something I have covered in my video up here. Last is the motion parallax effect. This is similar to binocular cues, but involves movement. Instead of triangulating the distance between two eyes, you triangulate the distance between two different places when you move around. It can be much more effective than retinal disparity due to larger distances, but like retinal disparity, it's almost impossible to manipulate. Unlike retinal disparity, however, this can happen in-game when you move around, but is also not too accurate, so manipulation of depth can still occur, especially when manipulating all other monocular cues. Now that we've covered what forced perspective is and what causes it, it's time to discuss the actual techniques to make it. First, we have relative size. Now, because storytelling is good for attention, let me give two real-life examples of this. The first occurred when I was hiking in the Rocky Mountains of New Mexico last year. A few friends and I were climbing a 3,500-meter peak, and we were at a point supposedly about 2 kilometers away when we got a view of the mountain. However, when we did, we were immediately disappointed. Instead of appearing just a few hundred meters in less than an hour's hike above us, it seemed impossibly far away. Even the trees, which were over 10 meters tall, just appeared as small pinpricks against the almost detailless rock of the summit. However, when we arrived at the top, a little over a half hour later, we realized the cause of our confusion. Due to the altitude, the trees around the summit were barely a meter tall, and the fact that the rocks were practically gravel at the top also created a detail gradient. This is also done extensively at Disneyland/World, which is famous for its use of forced perspective. In Main Street, USA, the 3-story buildings are actually a lie. In fact, each floor is so much shorter than the floor below it that the third floor is half the height of the first. What this does is uses your brain's idea of relative size and skews it in one direction. References are one of the best ways to create forced perspective, and making something that is normally the same size vastly smaller is an easy way to create forced perspective. For example, this mountain here is not all that high. However, it uses 1 or 2 block trees at the top to make it appear far larger than it actually is, especially when viewed from the bottom, surrounded by the 15-block tall trees. Now, of the remaining 6 monocular cues, only 2 are useful when creating forced perspective. This is why relative size is so powerful. Of the 6, interposition, linear perspective, and the parallax effect are all non-manipulatable, unless you're building something at such a scale where you can bend lines to make the appearance of linear perspective. However, that is way too complicated for this video, which is already long enough. A 4th monocular cue, light and shadow, is also effectively useless for forced perspective, both because Minecraft already renders shadows, and because there are very few situations in which this would actually be useful. But you know what is useful? Subscribing. By just taking the time to subscribe and press the like button, you can help this channel a lot and make sure I can keep creating this type of content for you and the many others who like it. It only takes a few seconds of your time, which seeing as you're spending 10 minutes of your life watching a video about obscure architectural techniques in a 15-year-old video game you can hardly complain about. Also, feel free to leave a comment if you have any questions, suggestions, or just want to talk about how amazing that segue was. Now, back to building. We now have 2 monocular cues left: detail gradients and aerial perspective. Detail gradients are just created by using more detail at the bottom of the structure and less detail at the top, like what I saw in New Mexico with all the boulders being at the bottom of the mountain. This can be demonstrated in Good Times with Scar's laser in Hermitcraft Season 7, which is also one of only 3 times I've ever heard forced perspective mentioned in relation to Minecraft, the other 2 both being, surprise surprise, beat-ups. Now, while area perspective would sound like it is useless, it is in fact the key component in a Minecraft technique that almost everyone knows about, and that, coincidentally, I've made a video about, linked right up here. That, of course, is gradients. Many people, myself included, have used gradients in taller structures both because they direct the eye upwards, and because they are the best way to use aerial perspective. What this basically does is make the top of the mountain far lighter, which also makes it seem further away. I've done a simple version of it here, along with using the gradient to exaggerate the depth of a few places on the mountain. This is a topic that I could cover far more in depth, but unfortunately don't have time to in this video. Now, forced perspective is an extremely complicated topic, in part because many forced perspective tricks rely on manipulating something else, especially detail gradients and aerial perspective: color. Now, while I didn't cover color much in this video, I made an entirely different video only on color theory that you can watch right now if you want to, and it's linked right here on the screen. And of course, thanks for watching.